Maya stared at her phone screen, reading the same text message for the fifth time. "You're being too sensitive again. This is why nobody likes you." Her hands trembled as she set the device down. How had she gotten here? How had the man who once called her his perfect goddess turned into someone who made her question her own reality? 6 months earlier, Maya Rodriguez had been living her best life in downtown Chicago. At 28, she was a successful graphic designer with her own small studio, a close circle of friends, and a confidence that seemed unshakable. She had goals, dreams, and most importantly, she knew her worth. But then she met David. David Chen appeared in her life like something out of a romantic movie. Tall, charming, with an MBA from Northwestern and a smile that could light up Michigan Avenue. He swept into her favorite coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning, ordered the most expensive drink on the menu, and somehow ended up at her table within minutes. "I couldn't help but notice your laptop stickers," he said, pointing to her collection of design software logos. "Creative type, huh? I admire that. Most people these days lack any real artistic vision." Maya should have caught that first red flag, the subtle put-down of others wrapped in what seemed like a compliment to her. But David's attention felt intoxicating. He listened to her talk about her work with what appeared to be genuine fascination. He asked thoughtful questions. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. Their first date was magical. David took her to an upscale restaurant in River North, somewhere Maya would never have gone on her own. He ordered wine without looking at the price, told stories that made her laugh, and seemed genuinely interested in everything about her. When he walked her to her car, he didn't try to kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and said, "I want to take my time with someone as special as you." Maya felt her heart skip. Here was a man who respected her, who saw her value, who wanted to build something real. She went home that night and called her best friend Zoe, gushing about this incredible guy who seemed too good to be true. Looking back now, Maya realized that phrase should have been a warning. Too good to be true usually meant exactly that. The love bombing started immediately. David texted her good morning every day, sent flowers to her office, and planned elaborate dates that made her feel like a princess. Within 2 weeks, he was telling her she was unlike any woman he had ever met. Within a month, he said he loved her. Maya's rational mind whispered that it was too fast, but David's intensity was addictive. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he told her one evening as they walked along the lakefront. "You're perfect, Maya. You're everything I've been looking for." But perfect, Maya would learn, was a dangerous pedestal to be placed on, because pedestals are high places, and high places means there's only one direction to fall. The first crack appeared during their 3rd month together. Maya had made plans to have dinner with Zoe, something she'd been doing monthly for 3 years. When she mentioned it to David, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Oh," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I thought we might spend tonight together. I had something special planned." When Maya explained that she couldn't cancel on her friend again, she'd already postponed twice for David, his mask slipped completely. "I see. So Zoe is more important than our relationship." His voice took on a hurt, wounded tone that made Maya's chest tighten with guilt. "I just thought what we had was special. I guess I was wrong." Maya found herself apologizing, explaining, trying to make him understand that it wasn't about choosing sides. But David had already withdrawn, giving her the cold shoulder treatment that would become his signature move. By the end of the night, Maya had canceled on Zoe and spent the evening reassuring David of her commitment to him. That's how it started. the slow, methodical isolation disguised as love. Over the next few months, David had something negative to say about everyone in Maya's life. Zoe was jealous of their relationship and trying to sabotage it. Her work friends were unprofessional and beneath her. Her family didn't understand her potential the way he did. Each criticism was delivered with what seemed like concern for Maya's well-being. "I just want what's best for you," he'd say. "I can see how they're holding you back." Meanwhile, Maya found herself walking on eggshells around David's moods. The man who had once hung on her every word now seemed easily irritated by things she said or did. Her quirky sense of humor, which he'd once claimed to adore, now often fell flat or even annoyed him. Her career, which he initially praised, became something he subtly undermined. "Still working on that little project?" he'd ask about a major client campaign, his tone suggesting it was barely worth his attention. "I keep thinking you could do so much more if you set your sights higher. Maybe work for a real agency instead of playing in your studio." The put-downs were always wrapped in seeming concern for her growth. Maya began to second-guess herself, wondering if maybe he was right. Maybe she was settling for less than she deserved. Maybe her friends really were toxic influences. Maybe she really was too sensitive when his constructive criticism made her feel small. The turning point came 6 months into their relationship. Maya had been commissioned to design a logo for a prominent local nonprofit, something she was incredibly proud of. When she excitedly showed David the final design, expecting his support and praise, she was met with a dismissive glance. It's fine, I guess. Pretty basic, though. I could probably whip up something in Photoshop in about 10 minutes. Maya felt her excitement deflate like a punctured balloon. "You don't think it's good?" "I didn't say that," David replied, his voice taking on that patient tone he used when he thought she was being unreasonable. "I'm just saying maybe you're not pushing yourself creatively. This looks like something a college student might do for a class project." The words hit Maya like physical blows. This was her work, her passion, her talent that she'd spent years developing, and the man who claimed to love her had just dismissed it as amateur hour. But instead of getting angry, Maya found herself trying to see his point. Maybe the design was too simple. Maybe she had been phoning it in. Maybe David, with his business background, could see flaws that her emotional attachment to the work had blinded her to. That night, Maya lay in bed next to David, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand why she felt so hollow inside. The man sleeping beside her had told her he loved her just hours earlier, right after tearing down her professional confidence. How could someone who loved her make her feel so worthless? The answer came to her gradually over the following weeks, through small moments of clarity that broke through the fog of manipulation, like when David praised her publicly at a work function, calling her his talented girlfriend in front of colleagues, only to criticize the same work privately later. Or when he love-bombed her with gifts and attention after particularly cruel comments, making her question whether the cruelty had even happened. Maya started to notice patterns. David's affection was conditional, dependent on her compliance with his expectations. When she agreed with him, when he made him look good, when she prioritized his needs over her own, she was his perfect goddess again. But the moment she expressed a different opinion, made plans that didn't include him, or achieved something independently, she became someone who was too sensitive, selfish, or not living up to her potential. The final straw came during what was supposed to be a romantic weekend getaway. Maya had been looking forward to it for weeks, hoping it might help them reconnect. Instead, David spent most of the weekend on work calls, leaving Maya alone at the resort. When she gently mentioned feeling neglected, his response was swift and brutal. "Everything is always about you, isn't it?" he snapped. "I work my ass off to pay for weekends like this, and all you can do is complain? Maybe if you had a real career instead of your little art project, you would understand what actual responsibility looks like." In that moment, something clicked for Maya. She saw the relationship clearly for the first time in months. The love bombing followed by devaluation, the isolation from her support system, the constant criticism disguised as help, the way her accomplishments were minimized while her perceived failures were magnified, the emotional roller coaster that kept her constantly trying to earn back his approval. Maya was dating a narcissist. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it meant she wasn't crazy, wasn't too sensitive, wasn't fundamentally flawed. Terrifying because it meant the man she'd fallen in love with had never really existed at all. The charming, attentive David from their early days had been a carefully constructed persona designed to hook her. The critical, controlling David was the real person underneath. That weekend, Maya made a decision. She couldn't continue living in this toxic cycle, walking on eggshells around someone who claimed to love her but consistently made her feel worthless. She deserved better than a relationship that required her to shrink herself to fit someone else's ego. The breakup was brutal. David cycled through the entire narcissistic playbook. First, he tried love bombing again, promising to change, showering her with the affection and attention she'd been craving. When that didn't work, he switched to anger and blame, telling her she was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to her. Finally, he moved to what psychologists call the smear campaign, trying to turn mutual acquaintances against her by painting himself as the victim of her unreasonable behavior. But Maya held firm. She'd done her research by then, reading articles about narcissistic abuse and recognizing her own experience in every description. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't too sensitive. She was someone who had been systematically manipulated by a person who saw relationships as competitions to win rather than partnerships to nurture. The healing process wasn't easy. Maya had to rebuild her confidence, reconnect with the friends she'd neglected, and learn to trust her own perceptions again. There were days when she questioned her decision, when David's voice in her head told her she'd made a mistake, that she'd never find anyone who loved her like he did. But slowly, with the help of therapy and the support of people who truly cared about her well-being, Maya began to reclaim herself. She remembered who she was before David, rediscovered her passions, and started to rebuild her life on her terms. That's when she decided to see Dr. Emily Carter. Dr. Carter's office felt like a sanctuary after months of emotional chaos. The therapist listened as Maya recounted her story, nodding with understanding rather than judgment. "What you experienced, Maya, was a textbook case of narcissistic abuse," Dr. Emily Carter explained gently. "The pattern you described, the initial idealization followed by devaluation, and then the attempts to hoover you back, is unfortunately very common." Maya felt a wave of validation wash over her. "So I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being too sensitive." "Absolutely not," Dr. Carter assured her. "Narcissistic partners are experts at making their victims question their own reality. It's called gaslighting, and it's one of their most effective tools for maintaining control." Dr. Carter went on to explain the psychology behind narcissistic behavior. People with narcissistic personality disorder have an inflated sense of self-importance, but underneath that grandiosity is actually very fragile self-esteem. They need constant validation and admiration to maintain their self-image. When they enter relationships, they're not looking for a partner. They're looking for what we call narcissistic supply. "What does that mean?" Maya asked. It means they need someone who will consistently feed their ego, make them look good, and serve their emotional needs without expecting genuine reciprocity. The love bombing phase you experienced, that's not really love. It's a strategy to secure your attachment so they can begin the process of molding you into their ideal supply source. Maya thought about all the times David had made her feel like she was the problem, like she wasn't good enough, like she needed to change to deserve his love. Is that why nothing I did ever seemed to be enough? Exactly, Dr. Carter nodded. Narcissistic partners create impossible standards that constantly shift. The goal isn't for you to meet them, it's to keep you in a state of always trying, always striving for their approval. It's a form of control. Over the following sessions, Dr. Carter helped Maya understand the red flags she'd missed early in the relationship. The love bombing that felt too intense too soon. The subtle way David had isolated her from her support system. The way he had positioned himself as the expert on everything, including her own life and feelings. One of the most insidious aspects of narcissistic abuse is that it happens gradually. It's like the metaphor of the frog in boiling water. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it will jump out immediately. But if you put it in cool water and slowly turn up the heat, it won't notice until it's too late. Maya found that metaphor painfully accurate. She would never have stayed with someone who treated her cruelly from day one. But David had slowly escalated his controlling and critical behavior over months. Each boundary crossed, followed by just enough affection to keep her hoping things would get better. The important thing to remember is that this wasn't your fault. Narcissistic individuals are often charming and charismatic. They know how to present themselves in the most appealing way possible during the initial stages of a relationship. Many intelligent, successful people fall for these tactics. Maya began to understand that her experience wasn't a reflection of her weakness or gullibility, but rather of David's calculated manipulation. She learned about trauma bonding, the psychological phenomenon that explains why it's so hard to leave abusive relationships even when you know they're unhealthy. The cycle of idealization and devaluation creates an addiction-like dynamic. Your brain becomes conditioned to seek out those moments of approval and affection, even though they come at the cost of your self-esteem and autonomy. Through therapy, Maya also learned to recognize the long-term effects of the relationship, the way she'd started second-guessing herself at work, the anxiety she felt when making decisions, the tendency to apologize for things that weren't her fault. These weren't character flaws, they were trauma responses to months of psychological manipulation. Recovery from narcissistic abuse takes time, Dr. Carter told her during one of their later sessions. You're not just getting over a breakup. You're healing from systematic psychological harm and reclaiming your sense of self. Maya threw herself into the healing process. She practiced setting boundaries, saying no without extensive explanations, and trusting her own instincts again. She reconnected with Zoe and her other friends, rebuilding the support system that David had systematically undermined. Most importantly, she learned to recognize the warning signs so she could protect herself in future relationships. Months later, Maya found herself in a much healthier place. Her business was thriving again, her relationships were stronger, and she'd regained the confidence that David had slowly chipped away. When she did start dating again, she was armed with knowledge about red flags and the importance of maintaining her independence and her support system. "I'm grateful for what I learned," she told Dr. Carter during one of their final sessions. Not grateful for the pain, but grateful for the awareness. I know now that love isn't supposed to make you feel small or question your own reality. Real love supports your growth. It doesn't try to control it. Dr. Carter smiled. That's one of the most important lessons you can learn. Healthy relationships enhance who you are. They don't require you to become someone else. Maya's story serves as a powerful reminder that narcissistic abuse can happen to anyone. The warning signs, love bombing, isolation, gaslighting, criticism disguised as concern, and the cycle of idealization and devaluation are patterns that many people experience but don't always recognize. The key to protection is education and maintaining connections with people who truly care about your well-being. Trust your instincts. If someone's love feels conditional, if you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, if you're questioning your own reality more often than not, these are signs that something is wrong. Recovery is possible, but it takes time and often professional help. If you recognize yourself in Maya's story, know that you're not alone and it's not your fault. With the right support and resources, you can rebuild your life and relationships on a foundation of genuine respect and love.